With some halachot of Muktzeh, different types of Keli Shemelachto. We'll give a few more examples today. We'll maybe spend a few more days on this because there are many examples. Kitvei HaKodesh. What about different scriptures, different writings, meaning like a Mezuza or a Megilla, different types of Kitvei Kodesh? Is that considered Muktzeh on Shabbat, or can you move it and use it on Shabbat? So the halacha is Kitvei HaKodesh en aleim Torah Muktzeh. Mutar l'tadlam afilu stam shelo l'tzorich klal. If you have a Mezuza laying around in the house, so we're going to speak about Megillah momentarily, but all sorts of Kitvei Kodesh, or Ketoret, all of these things that are written on a cloth in the special Hebrew Ktav, these are not considered Muktzeh, and you're allowed to move them even for no real reason. Why? Because you're always allowed to open up one of these mezuzot, or open up the Ketoret, or open the Megillah, and learn from the letters, learn from the words, read from inside of it, and use that on Shabbat. There's no problem whatsoever. There's no Muktzeh when it comes to Torah on Shabbat. So now what about Megillah Esther itself? So Megillah Esther, we just explained, falls in this category of Kitvei Kodesh that should be mutar. There's one exception to the rule. The one exception to the rule is when the 15th day of Adar, meaning Shushan Purim, falls out on Shabbat, and we're in a walled city. Why is that the exception to the rule? Because Chachamim made a gezerah that you cannot. We don't read the Megillah on Shabbat. Let's carry it in the Rishon Rabim Dal Ramot. So the one day a year, in our calendar today, the only way it can fall out is Shushan Purim falls out on Shabbat. Our normal Yudal Purim won't fall out on Shabbat ever. Shushan Purim can. So Shushan Purim falls out on Shabbat. Then the gezerah still applies. So every other Shabbat of the year, you're allowed to read the Megillah, practice the Megillah, study from the Megillah. When Tet Vav of Shushan Purim falls out on Shabbat, then the Megillah would be considered Muktzeh, and you can't carry it, you can't use it on Shabbat because it's the exact Gezerah Chachamim instituted. But if Purim is, let's say like this year, on Muktzeh Shabbat, and that day is Erev Purim, there's no problem, there's no such Gezerah that Chachamim made. Now Mezuzot, we explain, you can, even though you're careful that you don't want to, God forbid, make the Mezuzah Pasul, it's not Muktzeh Mechmar Cheson Kis, because you can always open it and learn from it. There's many halachot that you can learn from just by looking at a Mezuzah, about Ketav, about Stam. All of these things are very important. Now, a few more items, just to give more examples. Different food items that are partially edible. For example, you take an unripe date, you leave it out in the sun, you wait for it to get ripened. You could, in theory, eat it, so that's why it's not Muktzeh. Or someone who's pickling different types of cucumbers, and they're not yet fully pickled. You can still eat it. You can still move it on Shabbat because it's edible beforehand, even though it's not in its final product. It's edible a little bit, and it's not considered Muktzeh. And last item, last discussion for today: frozen foods. What's the status of frozen foods? So even though right now, the halacha explains, even though at the current status, when it's frozen, it's inedible and you can't do anything with it, mutar betil tulam, frozen bread, frozen challah, or other items that are frozen, you're allowed to move them. Why? Even though that while they're still frozen, you can't eat them. Because you can take them out of the freezer and let them warm up and break their freeze, for example. There's no Muktzeh with these items. Or not. There's no distinction if you froze it to eat it today on Shabbat or in the future, because you can take it out of the freezer, let it sit in the room, and eventually it will be edible. It's not a problem whatsoever, and it won't be considered Muktzeh. Have a wonderful day and Shabbat Shalom.